David Price was 38 years old, and until that afternoon in Emory Hospital, he believed his marriage was the one thing in his life built to last. He was a civil engineer, a man who spent his days calculating exactly how much weight a structure could bear before it failed. He had never once applied that knowledge to his wife. Ruth Holloway was dying, and she had asked for David specifically, not her own daughter. When he took the old woman's hand, she pulled him close, her voice barely a thread of sound, and whispered 7 words that would dismantle 9 years of his life. "Don't trust my daughter. She's been lying to you for a long time." Before he could ask what she meant, the hospital room door swung open. Angela walked in, saw her dying mother's hand locked in her husband's, and froze, just for 2 seconds. But David was an engineer. He knew exactly what a stress fracture looked like the moment it appeared. What he uncovered in the weeks that followed would change everything. And Angela had no idea he was already looking. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The sun wasn't fully up yet when David Price pulled into the construction site. The sky was that deep, bruised purple that comes just before orange takes over. The air smelled like red clay and diesel and something metallic. The honest smell of a project in progress. He liked arriving before anyone else. He liked the silence of a site before the noise began. It gave him a few minutes to stand in front of what they were building and just think. He set his coffee on the hood of his truck, unrolled the blueprints across it, and held the corners down with his forearms. The plans showed the full span of the West Side Connector Bridge, 340 feet of reinforced concrete and structural steel that would, when finished, carry thousands of people safely over the I-285 interchange every single day. People who would never know his name. Never think about the load calculations he'd checked 4 times each. Never consider the stress points he'd flagged in the original design and corrected before anyone broke ground. That was fine. That was the job. David Price had been a civil engineer for 12 years, and he understood something that most people didn't. The best structures were invisible. You only noticed them when they failed. His job was to make sure they never did. He traced a measurement on the blueprint with his index finger and frowned slightly. Not a problem. Just a detail he wanted to walk out to the east pylon and verify before the crew arrived. He was built that way. He didn't assume, he confirmed. He didn't guess, he checked. His former supervisor at Harmon Bell Engineering had once told him, "David, you are the most methodical man I have ever met," and had said it like a compliment, which it was. He rolled the blueprints back up, tucked them under his arm, grabbed his hard hat from the back seat, and walked out toward the site. Behind him, in a different part of the city, his wife was still asleep. Angela Price, 36 years old, was the kind of woman who walked into a room and quietly rearranged it. Not the furniture, but the attention. People turned toward her the way flowers turn toward light. She had a warmth that felt personal, even when it was being distributed evenly across a crowded party. And she had a memory for names and details that made everyone she met feel like the most important person in the space. She was also the one who handled the money. That had been her idea, early in the marriage, and David had accepted it without much thought. He spent his whole workday buried in numbers, load ratings, material costs, project budgets with 7 line items that all had to reconcile. Coming home and then opening a spreadsheet felt like the kind of punishment he hadn't earned. Angela had offered to manage the household finances, and he'd felt, honestly, relieved. She set up the accounts, tracked the bills, moved things around. He had full access to everything, always. He just never looked. They had 2 joint accounts, a checking and a savings. They were always saving. Saving for the bigger house in a better neighborhood. Saving for the trip to Portugal they'd been talking about since year 3. Saving for a family someday, when the timing was right. The timing was never quite right. "Not yet," Angela always said, with that warm smile that meant the conversation was over without ever feeling closed. "We've got time." 9 years. They'd been married 9 years, and David still reached for her in the dark without thinking about it. He still noticed the way she smelled when she came in from outside. He still liked the sound of her voice from the other room. He loved his wife. That was simple. That was true. His foreman, Marcus, arrived at 6:30 with 2 other crew members behind him, truck tires crunching gravel. They talked through the morning's priorities: east pylon inspection, a concrete pour scheduled for 10 a.m., a delivery they needed to confirm. David moved through it all with the easy authority of a man who had long since stopped needing to perform confidence because he simply had it. His phone buzzed in his vest pocket at 11:14 a.m. He almost didn't answer. He was mid-sentence with the structural inspector, pointing at a joint that needed a second look. But the number was Emory Hospital. He knew that number. It had shown up too many times in the past several months to ignore. He held up one finger to the inspector, stepped aside, and answered. The nurse's voice was calm and careful, the way hospital voices always were when the news was serious. Ruth Holloway had taken a sudden turn. Her blood pressure had dropped significantly that morning. They were keeping her comfortable, but the family should come. Then the nurse said the part that stopped him cold. "She's been asking for David." She said the name several times. David, specifically. Not Angela. Not her daughter. Him. He stood there for a moment with the phone still pressed to his ear, looking out across the half-built bridge. The morning light caught the steel cables and threw long shadows across the clay ground. David, specifically. He thanked the nurse. He hung up. He turned and found Marcus, and told him there was a family emergency. Marcus nodded immediately. "Go, go," and took the clipboard out of David's hand without being asked. David pulled off his hard hat as he walked back to his truck. He set it on the passenger seat. He started the engine. He thought about calling Angela. The instinct was there, automatic, the reflex of 9 years. But Ruth had asked for him, not her daughter, him. And David was the kind of man who honored the specific nature of a request. He pulled out of the site and drove toward Emory Hospital. He did not call Angela. The elevator doors opened on the 4th floor, and David followed the numbered signs down a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. His shoes made soft sounds on the linoleum. A nurse passed him pushing a cart. Someone down the hall was watching television, the sound thin and distant through a closed door. Room 412. He stopped in the doorway before he went in. Ruth Holloway was small in the bed. That was the first thing he noticed, how small she had become. The woman he remembered was sturdy, upright, the kind of woman who stood with her feet planted like she had roots. The woman in that bed was something else. The cancer had taken the bulk of her, had drawn her down to something spare and essential. Her arms on top of the blanket were thin. Her cheekbones were sharp under skin that had gone pale and papery. But her eyes were open, and when they found him in the doorway, they were exactly as he remembered. Dark and direct and completely alert. She knew exactly who had walked in. David took off his jacket and laid it over the chair by the window. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down without being asked. He reached out and covered her hand with his, gently, and her fingers moved immediately, gripping his with a strength that surprised him. For such thin hands, she held on hard. "David." Her voice was low, rougher than he remembered, but steady. "I'm here, Ruth," he said. "I'm right here." She looked at him for a long moment, like she was making sure he was real, like she had been waiting to say something and was now gathering herself for the effort of saying it correctly. "I want you to know," she said slowly, "that I love you like a son. I have always felt that way." "I know," he said. "I feel it. You've been good to her." Her jaw tightened slightly. Better than she deserved. Better than I could have asked. David started to speak, to say something kind, something that would ease the weight he could see she was carrying. But Ruth shook her head slightly. She wasn't finished. "I've stayed silent too long," she said. "I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was between the two of you, that maybe I was wrong about what I saw." She paused. Her chest rose and fell with careful effort. "But I'm not wrong, and I'm running out of time to say the things I should have said." Her grip tightened on his hand. She leaned toward him as close as she could manage, and her voice dropped to barely more than a breath. "Don't trust my daughter. She's been lying to you for a long time." The words entered him quietly. No explosion, no immediate collapse. He felt them settle in the center of his chest, the way something settles when it finds the place it belongs, as if some part of him had been waiting, without knowing it, for exactly this sentence. He kept his hand steady under hers. "Ruth," he said, soft and even, "what has she been lying about?" But Ruth's eyes were already closing. The effort of what she'd just done, the years of it, the weight of finally putting it into words, had drained something out of her. Her grip on his hand slackened, though it did not let go entirely. Her head tilted slightly toward the window. The afternoon light came in at a low angle and lay across the blanket in a pale stripe. She had said what she came to say. He sat with it. He did not move. He breathed slowly and let the words stay where they'd landed, turning them over without grabbing at them. "She's been lying to you for a long time." He was still sitting like that, still holding Ruth's hand, his face composed, his mind running quiet and deep. When the door opened behind him, he knew before he turned. Angela stepped into the room and stopped. Her eyes went to her mother in the bed, then to David, then to their joined hands, his wrapped around Ruth's on top of the blanket. The whole sweep of it took less than 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds, something moved across Angela's face that David would spend the next several days thinking about. It was not grief. It was not relief. It was closer to the expression of a person who has just walked into a room and understood in an instant that something has changed inside it, something they cannot see and cannot measure and cannot take back. Then it was gone. A full smile replaced it, soft-eyed and warm. She crossed the room. She leaned down and pressed her lips to her mother's forehead. She straightened and turned to David with those soft eyes and touched his shoulder gently. "Thank God you're here," she said. "How is she?" "Resting," David said. "She was awake for a little while." "Did she say anything?" "Not much." He looked at Ruth's sleeping face. "She was tired." Angela nodded, and her hand moved in a slow circle on his shoulder, and she made a small grieving sound low in her throat. David put his hand over hers. He did not say anything else. They drove home together in the early evening. Angela's car left in the hospital garage, the two of them quiet in his truck, the way people are quiet when grief has taken up all the available space. Angela looked out the passenger window. The city moved past in amber and gray. David kept both hands on the wheel. He was thinking about the 2 seconds, about what lived in a face for 2 seconds before a person remembered to put the right expression on. An engineer learned to pay attention to things like that, to the hairline crack in the concrete that didn't look like much, until you understood what it meant. You didn't panic at it. You didn't ignore it. You documented it. You kept watching. "Don't trust my daughter." Ruth had gripped his hand like a woman who needed to be believed. He turned onto their street. The porch light was on, the way Angela always said it when they left the house together. A small domestic habit, a warm yellow square in the early dark. He pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. He had questions. He had a great number of questions. But he understood, with the same certainty he brought to every structure he had ever built, that a question asked before you know what you're asking about is a question that warns the wrong person. He would not ask a single thing until he knew exactly what he was looking for. He got out of the truck. He came around and opened Angela's door. She took his hand as she stepped down, and he held it, and they walked together into the lit house. Ruth died on a Tuesday. It was quiet when it happened. No alarm. No sudden change. She simply breathed slower, and then slower still. And then she didn't breathe again. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. David believed her. Ruth's face had gone completely still, and there was nothing in it that looked like struggle. Angela made a sound beside him, a low, broken sound, and pressed her face into his shoulder. David put his arm around her and held her there. He stared at Ruth's face, at those hands, now still on the blanket, the same hands that had gripped his 4 days ago with everything she had left. He had not forgotten a single word. The days after a death fill up fast. There is always something that needs doing, some form that needs signing, some phone call that can't wait. David handled most of it. He called the funeral home. He coordinated with the church. He reached out to Ruth's sister Bernice and gave her the details with a calm, steady voice. And Bernice cried on the phone and told him he was a good man. He thanked her. He meant it. Angela drifted through those days, wrapped in a grief that looked right. She cried at the right moments. She accepted condolences with her eyes red-rimmed and her voice soft. At the reception after the service, she stood near the food table in a black dress that fit her perfectly, and she touched people's arms when they spoke to her. And she said, "Mama would have loved that you came," in a voice that never quite broke. She was good. She had always been good at this, at reading a room and giving it what it needed. But David was watching now with different eyes, and what he saw underneath the performance was a faint loosening. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would name. Just the particular quality of a person who has been carrying a secret fear for a long time, and that fear has now been removed. Ruth was the only one who had seen. Ruth was gone, and something in Angela's body, in the set of her shoulders, in the small exhale between condolences, had begun to unknot itself. David shook hands and accepted hugs and said, "She was a remarkable woman," until the last car pulled out of the driveway. Then he cleaned up the kitchen while Angela changed out of her dress upstairs, and he was thorough and quiet about it. And when Angela came back down in her robe and said she was exhausted, he told her to go rest. He said he'd be up soon. She kissed his cheek and went. He listened to her footsteps on the stairs. He listened to the sound of the bedroom door. He sat at the kitchen table in the low light above the stove and did not move for several minutes. Then he opened his laptop. He and Angela had 2 joint accounts, checking and savings. He had full access to both. He had always had access. He simply hadn't used it, leaving the management to her because it seemed like a reasonable division of their life. She was good with the details. He was tired after work. It had made sense. He opened the checking account first. He pulled 12 months of statements, then 18. He read them the way he read structural reports, line by line, looking for anything that didn't follow the pattern. It took him less than 20 minutes to find it. The transfers were not hidden. That was the thing. They were right there, regular as a utility bill, going out on the 11th of every month. $800, sometimes $1,000, once $1,400. The memo line on each one said the same thing: household. He had a spreadsheet open before he was fully aware he'd decided to make one. He went through all 18 months. He wrote down every date, every amount. He added them up twice to make sure. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the number at the bottom of the column. $18,940. He did not call the bank. He did not slam the laptop shut. He did not go upstairs and stand in the bedroom doorway and look at his sleeping wife. He opened a browser window, created a new email address on a provider he'd never used, a random name, nothing attached to him, and then opened a blank document inside it. He thought for a moment about what to call it. Then he typed, "Load calculations." He logged every transfer. Date, amount, memo line, the account number the money was going to, a string of digits that matched nothing he recognized. He noted the transfer pattern, the regularity, the fact that the amounts varied just enough to avoid looking automatic, just enough to look like expenses. Whoever set this up had been careful. He was more careful. He worked until the clock on the stove read 2:04 a.m. When he was done, he read back through everything he'd entered, checked it once more against the statements, then closed the document, closed the browser, and closed the laptop. The house was completely silent. Upstairs, Angela slept. Somewhere in the quiet of that kitchen, Ruth's voice still sat with him, patient, certain, already proven right. David folded his hands on the table and looked at nothing in particular. He did not have the full shape of this yet. He was not going to move until he did. The text he sent Candace Briggs the next morning was 11 words. "Hey, you free for lunch this week? Catching up overdue?" He sent it at 7:14 a.m., standing in the kitchen with his coffee, listening to the shower running upstairs. He kept the message exactly that light. No urgency, no hint of what he was carrying. Candace replied in 4 minutes. Thursday. "That Thai place on Ponce, 12:30. Don't be late." He smiled at his phone. That was Candace. No ceremony, no fuss. Just the answer. Delivered like a fact. He slipped the phone into his pocket and rinsed his mug and went to work. Thursday came quickly. The restaurant was small, warm, tucked between a dry cleaner and a nail salon on a block that smelled like exhaust and lemongrass. David arrived 5 minutes early. Candace arrived at exactly 12:30, in a gray blazer, her natural hair pulled back, a leather tote over one shoulder. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who spent her days inside other people's numbers and missed nothing. She hugged him at the door. Not long, not dramatic, just solid and real. "You look tired," she said. "I'm fine," he said. She looked at him for a half-second longer than a casual glance. Then she let it go, and followed the hostess to their table. They ordered. They talked about her drive-in, about his bridge project, about a mutual friend from Howard, who had just relocated to Houston. The food came. They ate. When the plates were half cleared, David reached into the folder he'd placed face down on the empty chair beside him. He set the printed statements on the table in front of Candace, without a word. She looked at him once. Then she looked at the papers. She read the way she always worked. Still, focused. No expression moving across her face. She turned the pages slowly, tracking the columns with her eyes. She didn't ask questions while she read. She didn't react. She just read. When she got to the last page, she set the stack down and aligned the edges against the table with one careful tap. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. 18 months is what I can confirm," David said. Candace nodded slowly, like that number had told her exactly what she expected to hear. "That's likely just the surface," she said. "That's how long you went back. That's not necessarily how long it's been happening." He'd already thought that, but hearing her say it still landed with weight. "I know," he said. She looked at the statements again, then back at him. "I need written authorization from you to pull further records. Full history. Both accounts." She paused. "Can you give me that?" "Yes." "Then give it to me before we leave today." She picked up her water glass. "And David, don't say anything to her. Not yet. Not until we know the full shape of it." There it was. That phrase. The same one that had been sitting in him since Tuesday night. "I know," he said again. She studied him for a moment. There was something careful in her face. Not pity. Nothing like that. More like the look of a person who had been watching something from a distance for a long time and was finally being allowed to say so. She never liked that we were close, Candace said. It wasn't a question. David looked at the table. 9 years of it moved through him in a single breath. The dinners that got cancelled. The Candace is a lot delivered with a soft smile across the kitchen. The way every plan they made seemed to find a reason to fall apart. He had never named it as strategy. He had filed it away as Angela being Angela. A little territorial, a little possessive, nothing worth making an issue of. He understood now why she had worked so hard to keep Candace at arm's length. Because Candace had a forensic accountant's eyes, and Angela had known it. No, David said. She didn't, Candace nodded. I'm glad you called me. Me too, he said. He wrote out the authorization on a notepad she pulled from her tote. Simple, signed, dated. She folded it and placed it in the front pocket of the bag with the same deliberate care she gave to everything. Then they split the check and walked out into the afternoon and went back to their separate lives. Angela had cooked by the time he got home. Something with chicken and roasted garlic, the whole house smelling like a Sunday. She was at the stove when he came through the back door, still in her work clothes, a dish towel over her shoulder. Perfect timing, she said, and smiled at him. He complimented the food twice. He meant it. It was good. Angela had always been a real cook. They sat across from each other at the table they had eaten at for 9 years, and she told him about an event coming up for a colleague, something at a venue downtown, the kind of work function she always handled with ease. She talked about what she might wear. She talked about the catering. He listened. He nodded. He cleared the plates when they were done, running warm water over each one, stacking them carefully in the rack. Angela kept talking behind him. He kept listening. He was already somewhere else entirely. The call came on a Tuesday. David was out on the bridge site, standing at the east embankment with a set of revised drainage plans rolled under his arm, when his phone buzzed in his vest pocket. He checked the screen. Candace. He held up one finger to his crew foreman and walked 30 feet to where the noise dropped off. Candace. I found the account holder. Her voice was measured, deliberate, the tone of a woman who had confirmed something and was choosing her words carefully before releasing them. Joint account. 2 names on it. Yours isn't one of them. He already knew that. But he waited. The second holder is Angela, she said. The first is a man named Philip Wade. David said nothing. He looked out at the steel framing rising over the river. The morning light hit the water flat and gray. You know that name? Candace asked. Yeah, he said. I know it. He did. Philip Wade. Angela's work friend. That was always how she'd said it. Easy and casual. The way you mention someone who barely registers. A consultant I work with sometimes. You'd like him? He's low-key. David had met him twice. Once at a company holiday party 3 years ago. Once at a conference dinner the following spring. Both times Philip had shaken his hand, made ordinary conversation about traffic and sports, and left no particular impression. Medium height, well-dressed, the kind of face that didn't catch in your memory. He was supposed to be forgettable. David understood now that this had required effort. There's more, Candace said. Philip Wade purchased a condo in Midtown 4 years ago. I pulled the property records. She paused. The month he closed on it is the same month that joint account was opened. Down payment was $22,000. The river moved below the framing. David watched it. You still there? Candace asked. I'm here. David. I heard you, he said. I'm not going anywhere. He meant it both ways. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll keep pulling. There's more to find. I know it. Thank you, Candace. He hung up and stood at the embankment for another minute. The plans still rolled under his arm, the sounds of the site moving around him, steel on steel, the low grind of equipment, somebody shouting a measurement from somewhere above. All of it ordinary, all of it continuing without interruption, because the world did not pause for the moment A blueprint finally revealed its flaw. He went back to work. That evening, David sat in the parking lot of a library branch on his way home. He didn't go inside. He just opened his phone and began pulling what he could find on Philip Wade. LinkedIn first. Philip Wade, independent financial consultant. 12 years of experience. Prior roles at 2 mid-size firms, both in Atlanta. Headshot. Professional, pleasant, deliberately unremarkable. Mutual connections. 3. One of them was Angela. He kept going. Property records confirmed what Candace had told him. The Midtown condo, purchased 4 years ago. 100 square feet, listed at $218,000 at the time of sale. The down payment had been just over 10%. He did the math without needing to think about it. He put the phone down and sat with the windows up and the engine off and let himself do the thing he had been holding at bay since Tuesday night, 2 weeks ago. He went back through 9 years of memory. Not frantically, deliberately. The way he reviewed structural assessments, cross-referencing data points that had seemed unrelated until the full picture came into focus. The children, they didn't have. Every time he'd brought it up, Angela had a reason. Her career, their savings. We're not ready yet, baby. We'll know when it's time. He had been patient. He had believed her. The finances she managed, she had offered. It had seemed like a kindness. He had accepted it as one. Candace. The dinners that fell apart. The small comments, delivered with affection. She's a lot, David. You know how she gets. The friendship he had let go quiet, because it was easier than making it an issue. The business trips. He traveled 3 or 4 times a year, sometimes more, project-dependent. He tried now to match the dates in his memory to what he knew. He could not be precise without the records, but he could feel the shape of it. Every piece clicked into place, like load calculations confirming a structural failure. The weight had always been distributed wrong. He just hadn't looked at the numbers until now. He sat in the parked truck for a long time, outside a library he hadn't entered, watching a woman push a stroller across the parking lot in the low evening light. Then he started the engine and drove home. Angela was already inside. He could see the kitchen light through the front window as he pulled up to the house. He sat in the driveway for 10 seconds. No more. He went in through the front door. She called to him from the kitchen. He answered. He washed his hands. He sat down to dinner. They talked about nothing particular. She had had a long meeting. He had revised some drainage plans. The food was good. After she went upstairs, David opened his laptop at the kitchen table. He pulled up the document labeled Load Calculations. He added a new entry at the bottom of the page. Philip Wade, financial consultant. Joint account holder, confirmed. Midtown condo, purchased, date. Down payment, $22,000. Account opened same month. He stared at the name for a moment, then he closed the laptop and went to bed. The drive to Decatur took 30 minutes on a Saturday morning with light traffic. David kept the radio off. He had told Angela he needed some air, that he wanted to check on his dad. Leon didn't always say when he was struggling, and with Ruth's death still fresh, it seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Angela had nodded and kissed him on the cheek and told him to tell Leon she sent her love. He said he would. Leon Price lived in the same house in Decatur he had lived in for 26 years. A modest brick ranch on a quiet street with a crepe myrtle out front that bloomed pink every summer without fail, as reliable as the man inside. David pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment looking at it. The screen door that needed replacing, the garden hose coiled neatly on the left side of the porch. Everything in its place. Everything maintained. Leon answered before David could knock. "Saw your truck pull up," he said. He was in his weekend clothes, a flannel shirt, worn jeans, house slippers he refused to replace because they still had good life left. He looked at his son's face for a moment, the way fathers do, reading the thing beneath the surface, before either of them speaks. Come on in." The kitchen smelled like coffee and the faint trace of bacon grease from breakfast. Leon poured 2 cups without asking and set them on the table. They sat across from each other the way they had sat 100 times before. Elbows on the table, cups between their hands. No rush. They talked first about nothing important. The bridge project, Leon's blood pressure check earlier in the week, which had come back fine. A neighbor who had gotten a new dog that barked at 6 in the morning. Leon complained about the dog without much heat. David listened. Then the coffee was half gone and the small talk ran out. David set his cup down. He looked at his father. "Dad, did you ever get a feeling about Angela that you kept to yourself?" The kitchen went quiet. Leon did not answer right away. That was not unusual. Leon Price was not a man who filled silence with the first thing that came to his mouth. But this silence had a different weight. David could feel it. Leon wrapped both hands around his mug. He looked down at the table. Then he looked up. "Yeah," he said. "I did." David waited. 3 years ago," Leon said. "That cookout we had in August. Remember it?" David remembered it. A Saturday afternoon. The backyard full of people. Someone's kids running through the sprinkler in the side yard. One of those easy summer days that felt good while you were in it. "I went around to the back fence to check if the gate was latched," Leon said. "Kids were running around. I didn't want anybody getting out into the alley." He paused. "Angela was back there. She had her phone up to her ear, and she was standing close to the fence, like she wanted distance from the noise." He paused again. "She wasn't hollering or upset or nothing like that, but she was speaking low, focused, the way somebody talks when they don't want to be heard." He shook his head slowly. "I turned around and went back inside. Didn't say a word." David kept his voice even. "Why not?" Leon exhaled through his nose. He put the mug down. "Because she'd always been good to me," he said. "Always warm. Always remembered what I liked. Always asked about my health. I told myself I was seeing something that wasn't there." He looked at his son steadily. "I told myself it wasn't my place." The word place hung between them for a moment. "I should have said something to you," Leon said. "A man who loves his son doesn't sit on a thing like that. I knew it then, and I let it go anyway." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry, David." David looked at his father, at the lines around his eyes, the set of his shoulders, the way he was holding the guilt of 3 years in the space of a Saturday morning conversation. He felt something move through him, not anger at his father, the opposite of that. "Don't carry that," David said. "That's not yours to carry. David, listen to me." He leaned forward slightly. "She was good at it. That's the point. She was very good at making everybody around her feel like they were reading it wrong." He held his father's gaze. "I lived in the house with her, and I didn't see it. You saw it for 2 seconds at a cookout, and you talked yourself out of it. That's not failure. That's just how she built it." Leon was quiet. He nodded once, slowly. "I may need your help soon," David said. "I don't know exactly how yet, but when the time comes, I need you sharp. Not sorry. You understand me?" Leon looked at him. Something in the older man's face settled. Not relief, exactly, but the specific resolve of a man who has been given a direction after too long sitting still. "Understood," Leon said. David hugged his father at the door before he left. Leon held on a beat longer than usual, and David let him. On the drive home, David kept the radio off again. Angela was in the living room when he walked in, her feet tucked under her on the couch, a glass of wine on the end table. "How's your dad?" she asked, looking up. "He's good," David said. He hung his jacket by the door. "Doing fine." His voice gave nothing away. The next evening, Angela made roasted chicken with green beans and rice. She moved around the kitchen the way she always did, with an easy, practiced confidence, plating everything neatly before she brought it to the table. She poured herself a glass of white wine and topped off David's water glass without being asked. It was a good performance. It had always been a good performance. David was just watching it differently now. They ate for a few minutes. Quiet. Comfortable. The kind of quiet that 9 years of shared meals produces. Then David set down his fork. "I've been thinking," he said, "about our finances." Angela looked up from her plate. Her expression was open, curious, warm. "Ruth's death got me thinking," he continued, "about getting things in order, making sure we're solid. I'd like to sit down together and go through everything. Savings, investments, where we actually stand." He kept his voice easy, thoughtful, a man processing grief the only way he knew how. "I want to feel like we're on the same page." Angela nodded slowly, as if she were genuinely moved by this. She reached across the table and touched his hand. "I think that's a really good idea," she said. "Honestly, I've been meaning to bring it up too. Maybe we should find a financial advisor. Someone outside of it, you know? A professional who can look at everything objectively." "I'd love that," David said. He picked his fork back up. Angela smiled. He watched her. The first week passed. Angela mentioned on Tuesday that she had looked into a few advisors but hadn't had time to call around. She had been busy with work. A project had come up. She'd get to it by the weekend. The weekend came. She said the advisor she liked had a waiting list, and she was checking on another one. She said it with total ease, the way people talk about small things they haven't forgotten, only delayed. David said, "No rush." The second week passed. She told him the holidays were creeping up, and that people were hard to schedule this time of year. She said they'd sit down themselves if the advisor thing didn't come together soon. She said it while scrolling her phone on the couch, her feet tucked under her, her voice mild and unbothered. "Sounds good," David said. He had expected all of it. Every excuse, every smooth transition from one delay to the next. He had given her 2 weeks, and she had used every day of them exactly as he knew she would. He was not surprised. He was not angry. He was building. Candace called on a Thursday afternoon, while David was reviewing load specs at his desk. He stepped out into the hallway and closed the door behind him. "I have the full picture," she said. No preamble. That was Candace. "Tell me," David said. 5.5 years. Her voice was steady, but he knew her well enough to hear what was underneath it. Total diverted from joint accounts, $67,000. David said nothing. He stood in the hallway and let that number settle into him. "Part of it funded the joint account with Philip Wade," Candace continued. "We already knew that piece. But David, there's a second account. An individual account. In Angela's name only." She paused. "It was opened 14 months into your marriage." He had thought the ground was already gone from under him. He had been wrong. 14 months. He thought about what 14 months into their marriage looked like. The apartment they had shared while saving for the house, the Sunday mornings, the way she used to bring him coffee before he was fully awake, the cup already made the way he liked it. He had believed, completely, that those days were real. She had been building her exit before the paint was even dry. "You still there?" Candace asked. "I'm here," he said. 67,000, David. That's the real number. Over 5.5 years. And it started before most of your marriage happened." Her voice went quieter. She didn't fall into this. She planned it before she had anything to take. He thanked her. He told her he would call her in a day or two. He went back into his office, sat down at his desk, and stared at the structural drawings in front of him for a long moment. He did not call anyone. He did not go home and confront Angela. He did not do anything that evening except sit with it, the full, final shape of it, the way you have to sit with a calculation that changes every number that came before it. She had married him already building the way out. He let that be true. He sat with it all night. In the morning, David got dressed before Angela was awake. He made coffee, poured it into a travel mug, and walked to his truck in the early gray light. He sat behind the wheel in the driveway. He took out his phone. He found the number he had looked up 2 days ago. A divorce attorney. Private practice, across town, recommended by a colleague he trusted. He pressed call. The receptionist answered on the second ring. He scheduled a consultation for the following Wednesday. He gave his name, his number, and confirmed the time. He ended the call. He put the truck in reverse and backed out of the driveway and drove toward the job site like a man who had already made his decision. The attorney's name was Sandra Okafor. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building in Buckhead, quiet and deliberately unremarkable. The kind of place where people came to handle serious things without being seen doing it. David had paid the consultation fee on a personal credit card he'd opened 3 weeks ago. Cash back rewards. Angela didn't know it existed. He set the folder on the desk between them. Sandra opened it without ceremony. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s, with reading glasses she wore low on her nose, and the particular stillness of someone who had sat across from a great deal of pain and learned not to perform sympathy when precision was more useful. She read in silence, turned pages, went back to certain sections, made small notes in the margin of her legal pad. David sat and let her work. When she finished, she closed the folder and set her pen down. "How long did it take you to put this together?" she asked. "About a month," David said. She looked at him over her glasses. "And she has no idea." "No." Sandra nodded slowly. She tapped the edge of the folder. "In Georgia, marital assets are divided equitably, which does not mean equally. It means fairly, based on circumstances." She turned the folder to face him and pointed to the summary page Candace had prepared. When one spouse systematically diverts marital funds over a sustained period, especially into accounts held jointly with a third party, Georgia courts treat that as fraudulent marital waste. It is considered dissipation of assets. She paused. "This documentation is thorough. The forensic summary, the account trail, the property records connecting the third party. This is not a feeling, Mr. Price. This is a case." David had known that, but hearing it said plainly, in a quiet office on a Thursday morning, with a folder full of 5.5 years laid out on a mahogany desk, it still landed. "What does that mean for the settlement?" he asked. "It means the court can award you a disproportionate share of what remains, the retirement accounts, the equity in the home." She folded her hands. "It means she does not walk away clean. Not with this paper trail." He nodded once. "I'll have the filing documents prepared," Sandra said. "When you're ready to move, we move." 2 weeks, David said. She wrote it down. He opened the personal account that same afternoon. A separate bank entirely, not the institution he and Angela had used for 9 years. He walked in during his lunch break, sat with a banker for 20 minutes, and left with a routing number and a debit card he tucked into his work bag. That evening, he logged into his employer's payroll portal and redirected a portion of his direct deposit. Not a dramatic amount. Enough. The kind of quiet, steady repositioning that built solid ground over time. He understood that principle better than most. He called Aunt Bernice on a Sunday. She answered on the third ring, her voice carrying that particular Sunday afternoon warmth, like she had just come from somewhere good and was still settling back into the quiet of home. "David," she said. "Baby, how are you holding up?" "I'm getting there," he said. He meant it in more ways than she knew. "I've been thinking about Ruth, about how she deserved to be remembered properly. I'd like to have some family over. A dinner, at the house. Nothing formal. Just people who loved her, sharing a meal." Bernice was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had softened. She would have liked that. 2 weeks from Saturday, David said. "I was thinking you, and maybe Denise and Marcus if they're able. Angela's cousins, both of them close to Ruth, both of them people Bernice trusted." "I'll make sure they come," Bernice said. There was no hesitation in it. Bernice was the kind of woman whose word moved things. "You're a good man, David. Ruth knew that. She showed me that," he said. After he hung up, he called Denise. then Marcus. Both said yes. Both said it was exactly the kind of thing Ruth would have wanted. He kept his voice warm and unhurried through both calls. He thanked them. He told them to come hungry. That evening, he told Angela about the dinner. She stood at the bathroom mirror, removing her earrings, and she turned to look at him in the reflection. "A memorial dinner?" she said. "Just family," David said. "People who were close to her. I thought it would be nice. We have the space." Something crossed Angela's face. Not suspicion, just the mild recalibration of a woman who had not planned this and was deciding whether it required her to. It didn't take her long. She turned back to the mirror and set the second earring in the dish. "I'll do the cooking," she said. "I want it to be right." "I know you will," David said. He texted Candace before he turned off the light that night. 2 weeks. Be available. Full file ready. Her response came in under a minute. "Already done. I've been ready." He set the phone face down on the nightstand. The divorce papers were sitting in a sealed envelope in his truck's center console, signed and prepared, waiting for the moment Sandra told him to hand them over. David sat in the dark of the bedroom for a while after Angela's breathing went slow, and even beside him. He thought about controlled demolition. It was a precise science. People imagined it as destruction, but that was not what it was. It was the opposite of chaos. The engineers who brought a structure down cleanly, without damage to the buildings on either side, without debris scattered across 3 city blocks, they did not simply set charges and walk away. They studied the building first. They mapped every column, every load-bearing point, every place where the structure was holding more than it appeared to be. They understood that a building did not fall apart randomly. It fell in the direction you designed it to fall, if you were patient enough to learn its shape before you moved. David knew the shape of this. He had spent a month learning every point where Angela's carefully constructed life was carrying weight it could not afford to lose. He knew where to apply pressure. He knew what would come down and in what order. He knew who would be in the room when it happened, and what each of them already understood about the truth of things. In 2 weeks, he would apply pressure to exactly the right place. The structure would come down clean. The table looked the way Angela liked things to look. Candles at the center, low and warm. The good dishes, the cream-colored ones with the gold rim she'd picked out 2 Christmases ago. A pot of collard greens, a pan of cornbread, roasted chicken that had been in the oven since noon. The house smelled like Sunday, like someone's grandmother, like peace. Angela had done all of it herself, and she had done it well. She moved through the evening the way she moved through everything. Graceful, attentive, filling glasses before they were empty, laughing at the right moments. Bernice had complimented the chicken twice. Marcus had gone back for seconds of the cornbread. Denise was telling a story about Ruth that had the whole table smiling. Something about a road trip to Savannah in 1987. Ruth refusing to stop for directions. Everyone ending up at a bait shop outside of nowhere. "That sounds exactly like her," Angela said, shaking her head with a soft smile. "Mama never did like to ask for help." Bernice laughed, the kind of laugh that hurt a little. No, she did not. Leon sat at the far end of the table, quieter than the rest, the way he always was in groups. Not distant, just still. He had shaken David's hand at the door with both of his, and held it a beat longer than usual. He'd looked at his son the way a man looks when he wants to say something that needs to wait. David had nodded. Not yet. The dinner moved warmly for 40 minutes. Stories about Ruth. A few tears, quickly gentled by laughter. Angela kept everything flowing. More chicken, more tea. "Bernice, you have to try this sweet potato." She was very good. David had always known that. He just understood it differently now. He set down his fork. The sound was small, a quiet click of silver against ceramic, but something in the way he did it, deliberate, unhurried, drew eyes without him asking for them. "Before we go any further," he said, "I want to share something." His voice was even conversational, almost. "Something Ruth said to me before she passed." The table softened into quiet. Denise folded her hands. Marcus looked up from his plate. Bernice went still. Angela's smile held. "She asked for me specifically that afternoon," David said. "I think most of you knew that. She waited until I got there, and she gripped my hand, and she told me—" He paused, not for effect, but because the words still had weight. "She told me not to trust her daughter, that Angela had been lying to me for a long time." The quiet deepened. Angela's smile didn't collapse. It adjusted. A slight tilt of the head. A breath drawn with practiced calm. "David." Her voice was gentle, patient. The voice of a woman gently correcting a misunderstanding. "Mama was on a lot of medication. You know how she got in those last days. She and I had a complicated history, and sometimes she was clear," David said. Her eyes were sharp. She knew exactly where she was and exactly what she was saying. He looked at Angela without heat, without anger, just directly. "And I spent the last month finding out what she meant." He reached beside his chair. He set the folder on the table and slid it across to the center. It stopped in the space between them. No one reached for it. No one had to. David opened it himself, turned it to face the table, and spoke to everyone in the room at the same time. $67,000, he said. Over 5.5 years. Transferred out of our joint accounts in pieces small enough to look like nothing. He turned a page. Into an account that is not mine. A joint account. He tapped the name on the page. Opened with a man named Philip Wade. The same month Philip Wade purchased a condo in Midtown Atlanta with a $22,000 down payment. The table was absolutely still. Angela opened her mouth. "That account was for both of us." "It has his name on it," David said. "Not mine." Bernice had not moved. Her eyes were on the folder. Then she lifted them to Angela, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet and exact. The voice of a woman who had known Ruth Holloway for 67 years, and was asking the most important question in the room. "Did your mother know?" Angela said nothing. Her mouth opened slightly, closed. She looked at the folder, then at her hands, then somewhere past the candles at the center of the table. At nothing, really. At the place where an answer should have been. She could not say no, because Ruth had whispered those words to David herself. She could not say yes, because yes meant her mother had chosen David. At the end of her life, Ruth had chosen David. The silence said everything her mouth wouldn't. Leon set down his glass. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He was a man who had raised a son alone on steady work and honest words, and when he spoke, the room heard it in his bones. "My son built a life with you," Leon said. 9 years, and you were taking from him the whole time. Angela turned to David. Her eyes were wet now. Whether from guilt or panic or the specific grief of being fully seen, it was impossible to say. Maybe she didn't know either. "David," her voice dropped low. "Just for him. I love you. We can fix this. I will pay back every dollar. We can go to counseling. We can—" "I believed that was possible," David said. "About 3 weeks ago." He reached beside his chair one more time. "I don't anymore." He set the envelope on the table in front of her. She looked at it. She knew what it was before she opened it. He could see that she knew. Her hand moved toward it slowly, the way a person reaches for something they have been dreading for longer than they realized. Angela sat motionless at her own dinner table. The envelope was open in front of her. The papers inside were visible. Sandra Okafor's firm name at the top, David's signature at the bottom. The language of an ending laid out in clean, legal lines. The candles were still burning. The food was still on the table. The good dishes with the gold rims were still in their places. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 40 minutes ago. Nothing was. The bridge was almost done. David could see it from a quarter-mile out, the way the steel caught the early morning light and held it. Amber at first, then a clean, sharp gold as the sun climbed over the Atlanta skyline. 2 years of work. 2 years of calculations and site visits and problems solved in the rain and in the cold, and in the particular frustration of a project that never moved as fast as you needed it to. And now, here it was, standing, solid, exactly what the plans said it would be. He parked his truck and sat for a moment before getting out. 14 months. That's how long it had been since that dinner table. Since Angela sat motionless in front of the papers while the candles burned down and nobody spoke. The divorce settlement had come through 4 months after that night. Sandra Okafor had been precise and patient, and utterly without mercy when the moment called for it. The diverted funds, all $67,000, documented across 5.5 years in Candace's forensic summary, had been classified as fraudulent marital waste under Georgia law. That single classification shifted everything. Angela did not get the house. She did not get the retirement accounts. She did not get the future David had been building, brick by careful brick, for 9 years. She got her clothes, her car, her personal belongings packed into boxes that David did not touch, and the full weight of the debt she had created. Credit lines opened in her name alone, the tangled financial aftermath of a life lived dishonestly. She had tried to negotiate. Her attorney had pushed back twice. Sandra had presented the documentation both times. The judge had not been moved. David had not attended those sessions with satisfaction. He had attended them with the quiet focus of a man finishing a job that needed to be done correctly. Philip Wade had not fared better. His name had surfaced in the discoverable divorce records, joint account holder, co-beneficiary of funds diverted from a marital estate. His firm, a mid-size financial consulting group that put its reputation for integrity on every piece of letterhead, had opened an internal review the week those records became available. Philip had resigned before they could remove him. David had heard this secondhand through Candace, who had heard it through professional channels. He had not sought out the information. It had simply arrived, the way consequences tend to arrive for people who believe their exposure is someone else's problem. The Midtown condo was entangled in the asset proceedings for nearly 3 months before being released. Whatever it meant to Philip now, that clean modern space he had purchased the same month he opened an account with another man's money, it no longer looked the way it once had. David suspected Philip knew that every time he walked through the door. He and Angela had not stayed together. David had expected that. Angela had needed Philip as a place to store her exit. Philip had needed Angela to believe he was her destination. When the truth came out, there was nothing left between them that either of them wanted to examine. Bernice had done what women like Bernice do. She had not gone to social media. She had not made speeches. She had simply spoken. In kitchens and church halls and parking lots after Sunday service, in the plain, unhurried voice of a woman who had buried her sister and watched her niece sit silent when asked if her mother knew. The people who mattered in those circles knew Bernice. They knew she did not exaggerate and did not gossip and did not spend words carelessly. Angela's social world had not collapsed in a single moment. It had simply thinned, steadily and permanently, the way a foundation erodes, slowly, and then all at once. The image she had spent 9 years constructing, the devoted wife, the successful professional, the woman who had built something real, had nothing left to stand on. David did not follow any of this closely. He had heard enough to know it was true, and that was sufficient. His own life had expanded in the way that quiet lives do when the weight is finally lifted. He had been promoted to senior project engineer 8 months ago. The title came with a raise he did not need to share, and a set of responsibilities that fit him the way good work always had. like something he was built for. He had a new apartment on the east side of the city, clean and simply furnished, with a kitchen he was slowly learning to use. Leon came for dinner on Sundays. Candace joined them once a month, and those evenings were easy in the way that friendships are easy when they have never been anything but honest. He got out of the truck now and walked toward the site, hard hat in hand, the morning air cool and carrying the faint smell of river water from below. He stopped at the edge of the completed span and looked out over it. His phone was in his jacket pocket. He had looked at the message 3 times this week without responding. A woman named Vivian, whom he had met at a structural engineering conference in Charlotte. Quick, direct, someone who had made him laugh twice in one conversation without appearing to try. He took out his phone and read her message again. He smiled. Small, real. He typed back, "I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like."